Knotted thread. You'll need a few things to work your knotted thread into your embroidery. I usually like to make a little more of each knot style or color than I think I might use. It keeps me from having to stop embroidering in case I need to make more knotted thread. Embroidery thread. In order to attach your knotted thread, called couching, you'll want an embroidery floss that either matches the knotted thread, or you can even use a different color that would look nice with it as part of a design. Try looking online at examples of couching to see how contrasting thread looks. You'll want to make sure the spacing is even because it will stand out more. Needles. I usually have a few different needles handy when I'm embroidering, but the main needle you'll need depends on the embroidery floss you're using to couch the knotted thread. You won't be threading the needle with the knotted threads. Scissors. I prefer small, sharp embroidery scissors, but whatever you feel comfortable using. Just keep in mind you might need to cut in small areas with precision. Hoop or frame. Use whatever you prefer to embroider with. Just make sure your design area doesn't have an edge of a hoop eventually running through it. You might damage the knots and couching if you have to move the frame on top of the embroidery. Fabric. So far, I've only worked on a few projects with knotted thread. Each used a slightly different fabric, and each had a bit of a different feel to it while I was embroidering. You might consider doing a scrap test to see how the fabric will work for your embroidery needs. Glue. Speaking of fabrics reacting differently, one of my recent projects has a more grabby feel to it and has a tendency to work end knots loose and untie them over time. I have started using fabric glue, I'm trying fray check right now, on each beginning and end knot for each separate strand. If you do use a fabric glue to help keep the knots from coming untied, you might consider testing the glue on a scrap knotted thread to make sure it will hold enough and that it won't discolor the thread. If you've watched the knotting videos, here's how you can attach those knotted threads to your embroidery. Now, I'm new to embroidery, but I learned a lot of these techniques from the website Needle and Thread, and there will be a link at the end of the video. I'd like to start with an away knot. I don't mind using a long length at the start, but if your thread is short, you can use a very small crochet hook. I don't know if you can see that, but I use a very small one, and that way, when you go to wrap your threads at the end of your embroidery project, this will help you tuck those away. I'm using, for this project, a chenille knot. This is crochet thread. It's size 3, but it's a nice bulky length. And I'm also going to be using just regular cotton embroidery floss, 2 strands, because I just like the 2 strand. And you can use whatever you want. I'm using a darker color and I hope it shows up. So first off, I want to knot my thread. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to go on the front side, and I tend to waste quite a bit of thread. You don't have to do as much of that if you don't want. And then I take my knotted thread and get it handy, and see that line for the outline of the heart? You're using that for your guide, and you're pretty much going to be making your stitches on that line or as close to it as possible. This is really hard to do on the video. And if you see, I'm going like practically a thread away. And I just want to make sure it grabs it. Alright, I don't know if you can see that, but it's holding it down. I tend to be a little paranoid since I am new to embroidery, and I even go through and make an extra stitch. You don't have to do that. But see, now it's connected. And I just go along. Here's the next spot in the line. And just go a thread or 2 away from that. And you're just going to connect it. Each of your stitches should be perpendicular to the actual cord or knotted thread that you're couching. And as you see, your stitches pretty much just go along the line like that in the back, and here's your wasted away knot. Alright, I'm about to go into the curve on the heart. As you see, instead of a straight line, I'm starting to take a curve, and it's just like anything else. You just take small little stitches, each little segment starts moving, and you eventually start turning, and it's very easy, even at this odd angle with my husband trying to shoot this video while I do this at a very strange angle. I'm still able to keep it going. And if you, this is going to be really hard to see, if you start having your line try to twist, let it go, and it'll try to fix itself and unwind, and that'll prevent tangles and knots. Alright, so here we are. We're starting to turn. And again, just getting close to the stitch. Correct it with your needle if you need to. Wait a minute, let me see where that is. Follow the line around. See? And you see how it's following the curve just fine, because where I'm tacking it down, that's where it's going to go. And this goes so quick. I love how fast this goes. Alright, I'm about to go into this little turn here where the heart bunches in at the center. And you know, this is one of those things I've had to guesstimate on. I have no idea how to do any of this. So what I basically do is I just figure out what's going to look the best, try to keep it tight, you know, without pulling too hard, but you don't want it to pull back out. And I just figure out how I want this to go. I think it would look pretty if I somehow position that knot right there. So what I'm going to do is come back under. I don't know if you can see the needles. I'm sliding it along and make sure I'm not tangling. You just want it to hold those knots down where you want them. See? It placed it at the point like I wanted. And then you just keep going. Alright, I'm coming up towards the end. I'm about to meet up with the first knot. So what I'm going to do is get in here and place it as close as I can. And again, since I'm a little paranoid, I take a second stitch. You don't have to do that, most likely. I'm still learning how to trust this. But if that hadn't been your last stitch, say you wanted to fill the heart, you would have simply just tacked it down like you were changing a corner. It's going to be hard to do because it's not tied down very well yet. And you just continue filling it. And you could just fill it with, you could change your couching thread, the dark blue there, you could change it to light blue or even white. You could even snip that off and start another color of knots. But since I'm just doing this for a practice sample to show people, I am going to end there, and what I will do to get rid of this big cord of knots and get them out of the way, I'm going to come in here and very carefully, because I don't want to cut the knot, and this is why I like these kinds of scissors, I'm going to snip that and remove this, and this can be used for another project. And there's the heart, but we're not done yet. We have to wrap the threads. And this is the one thing that I messed up on all the time when I was a kid because I didn't know how to do it right. And again, I'm a little paranoid. Let me get rid of this real quick because it's twisting. I'm a little paranoid and I do a little more than I probably should. And I'm going to take the sewing needle, I'm going to wrap on the first one, and then on the second one, careful not to actually catch the fabric, I'm going to wrap it twice, and I think this is helping supposedly lock it. And then usually you can go a few more stitches like that. I tend to go quite a few more because I'm just, I don't know. This seems strange to me, but as long as you don't have tons of knots and things on the back of your work. And I like this little tight stitch here, so I'm actually going to go through, and you don't have to do this step. This is just me being overly cautious. I took that twice. And then, when you're done with that, snip that off. Alright, so we still have the away wasted knot, and what you do is, I hope you can see that, I'm going to pull the knot up and snip the knot off, and that loosened that up. And actually, that's pretty short, so what I'm going to do is I'm going to use this and hope that I can actually do this without problem. And I'm going to pull it through. Because usually I use an even longer tail, but it's difficult to do that when you have a needle that you also have to thread and try to fight with. And here's the locking. And then, do you see how I'm just using it to pull it back through and wrap that thread? And I'm going to go ahead and finish it up here with my second paranoid locking stitch. And carefully clip that, and that's how you have a very clean back of your work with the knots here. Now, one thing I have noticed, on my first project I have a shiny satiny fabric, and all of my knots, this was my first project, you see how I have a lot of gaps between? This was very different. I didn't have any problems. In fact, I probably would have problems going through and trying to figure out where the knots started and stopped because they snake around quite a bit. I have not had any try to come undone. The recent project that I started, it's a different fabric. It's from my stash. I'm just trying to use it up. It's very textured, and in fact, if you'll notice this top chenille knot, or I think that's a chenille knot, it came undone, and I had to cut some length off of it. Some of these other knots have started coming undone. And I decided that I needed to use fabric glue to fix that. I'm using fray check right now to try to keep my knots from actually coming undone now. And I just recommend testing it on your threads and your knots to make sure it doesn't discolor the thread or that it actually even holds. And I probably use a little more than I should, but on the starting and ending knots, I just try to coat them to make sure that the surfaces, because this is a big knot, and I just make sure that I coat them, and sometimes I'll wait a little while and go over them again. And I usually just try to make sure that I get them enough to stick, and be careful about rubbing up against it or do anything too rough with it until the glue is dried or that I've even put some glue on there. But that's how you attach your knotted threads. It's called couching, and I highly recommend checking out that needle and thread site that will be linked at the end of the video, because I've been learning all my embroidery except for the knotted threads. That's the other links that I post. So I hope that helps, and I hope that clears up some mystery. I've had a lot of people asking me, what is this thing I'm doing? And that's it. That's as simple as it is. It's a lot of fun. I enjoy knotting and embroidering. It creates a really neat texture.